What is up, Hawk fans? I wanted to do a little update on the transfer portal regarding the Iowa Hawkeyes. I did actually record this video already. I recorded it while driving to church yesterday, and it sounds okay, but I think I would rather at this point, since I have found a means to do this rather quickly, just do it this way in a more controlled setting. While I have gotten it to not sound terrible, there is nothing like being able to do it in a space where it's relatively quiet and things like that. So just to delve into this straight away, Iowa, of course, will be playing Missouri in the Music City Bowl here coming up. It's right around the corner. There has been a lot of displeasure with how Iowa has performed in the transfer portal. And I've said this before with regards to David Eicholt. I actually think that David Eicholt is one of the few relatively honest media Iowa Hawkeye contributors. That's usually not the case. I've told you guys that time and time again, because they want to continue to have whatever access that they have to the Iowa football program in whatever capacity that is, which means that it usually does filter and bias their opinions. But he went on one of the Locked On podcasts, and they had a discussion about the transfer portal. It was a few days ago. And David Eicholt answered directly whether it has to do with money. That Iowa did not land, for example, Bo Pribula and some of these other targets. And like I said, I was very surprised. Well, not necessarily anymore. I would have been surprised, but just for lack of a better way of saying it, it was a breath of fresh air to hear his honesty, and he was right in line with everything that I have already said. Is, of course, that Iowa and the Swarm Collective do indeed have money. You can just even the basic amount of research. The last time I looked it up, the revenue that the University of Iowa football program generates, as well as the university as a whole, with regards to sports, it only took me a few seconds. I mean, you can easily find this information. A lot of this information is public. And on top of that, even if you didn't have that information, you could just look at Iowa over the last 40 years. And Iowa, I would say, is top 10%, 10 to 15%. Sometimes more, maybe sometimes a little less. But specifically in football, usually probably more. I'm kind of giving it a low-end estimate in fan engagement and fan support. Okay, Iowa football has been a solid to good to elite program over the last 40 years consistently. If you go back to the Hayden Fridays, and then, Kirk Ferentz. Now, of course, here or there were seasons that were, in the muck and did not do well. Hayden Fry's latter years, Kirk Ferentz's earlier years, and then I would say right after Kirk Ferentz's initial super successful stint around the 2001-2003 time, turning to the Jake Christensen era, he got right back to being successful. I'm trying to think if there was any other time that was as unsuccessful as the Jake Christensen time. There may have been one more year where Iowa had like a stunning 4-8 season. I would have to go back and look, but none are coming to memory. But nonetheless, Iowa has had support, and you can just see that with your own two eyes. Uh, David Eicholt, and again, for what it's worth, I've told you guys before, Sean Bach has me blocked on X. Of the two, I definitely prefer David Eicholt. But he said that Iowa was willing to pay I think he said the six figures to land Beau Pribula. I don't think he said 7. I think he said 6. Yeah, it would be in the hundreds of thousands. Could have been 7. I'd have to go back and rewatch. But suffice it to say, his answer to whether money was the reason Iowa did not land Beau Pribula was a big fat no. Iowa is competitive when it comes to financials, and that was not the reason. He went on to say that the reason Iowa has struggled, and I have already said this to you guys, at the wide receiver position and the quarterback position coming, swinging and missing, consistently coming in second place, is because they do not have a track record of success in the passing game. And while internally there's optimism about Iowa's offense, and we may know as Iowa fans that Iowa took a huge step forward offensively, mainly in the run game, from Brian Ferentz last year to Tim Lester's first year. Not every recruit is as well acquainted with that. Recruits look at how many all Big Ten performers. The last wide receiver that Iowa has had that has been an all Big Ten performer was 2011. Even Amir Smith-Marset and Brandon Smith, I don't believe, were Big Ten performers at their respective main position. Amir Smith-Marset was, as a return specialist, and the last wide receiver Iowa has had that was drafted has been Amir Smith-Marset, and a lot of that had to do with his return abilities. And even to this day in the NFL, he's primarily used as a return specialist. Although Chicago did definitely try to utilize him I think it was Chicago, in his first year or two in the pass game. But unfortunately, his wide receiver skills were not refined enough, and he actually dropped a lot of balls, so on and so on. So that's essentially what David Eicholt said. It doesn't have to do with money, and those of you who continuously say that as Iowa fans, it is absurd. You need to stop saying it. It's cope. It's just not accurate. And I've done multiple videos on this. At this point, I'm beating a dead horse. Now, to answer my original question of since this early signing period is done with the transfer portal window, regarding people having displeasure with how Iowa has done in the transfer portal, I would say, I would probably give them a grade of a C, maybe a C plus if I take into account their attempt to go after players. Now, Locked On was also intimating that it was a lack of messaging, that Iowa struggled with their messaging to these players. And perhaps that's true to a certain degree, but more of it, especially at the wide receiver and quarterback position, has to do with Iowa's lack of success in recent memory. Even at the quarterback position, yes, C.J. Beathard has been able to make a nice living in the NFL as a journeyman, as a backup, as a good team guy, and things of that nature. Nate Stanley didn't really last very long in the NFL, didn't get a huge opportunity. But you go back to 2010, and even if you take those guys into account, as you should, there hasn't been a lot of consistent success. Now, I would argue that Ken O'Keefe did a good job of outkicking his coverage, and he did a much better job than Brian Ferentz did in developing guys that they recruited out of high school towards becoming starting quarterbacks. If you go back, you can think about Ricky Stanzi. The next was James Vandenberg, and then actually even before that, Drew Tate, I believe, was one of Ken O'Keefe's. But let's just go from the Ricky Stanzi days. You'd have Ricky Stanzi, James Vandenberg. Then you had Jake Rudock, who honestly, I would love to have Jake Rudock these days. I mean, can you guys imagine having Jake Rudock the last couple of years at quarterback for Iowa? Man, if only we knew that it could get so much worse. And then, of course, CJ Beathard ended up winning the job, being able to provide Iowa with a little bit more of a spark, a little bit more mobile ability and kind of headiness and savviness to get kind of that extra winning production. And then after that, it was Nate Stanley. But in recent memory, after that, Iowa has tremendously struggled at developing or even having average to at times slightly above average quarterback play. And when I say average, I mean like average in the Big Ten, at times slightly above average. You look at all the quarterbacks in the Big Ten, and Iowa's quarterback is somewhere in the middle. The last 5 years, consistently, the quarterbacks have been bottom of the Big Ten, bottom of the barrel. And it's even worse at the wide receiver position. So this is going to be something that Iowa continues to battle. And, I am happy that Eichholt said exactly what I said, which is that this upcoming season is going to be the most important season that will dictate the how quickly Tim Lester can get this offense to the peak in which he can get it. And even if he can get them to their peak, this upcoming season is going to be the most important because he's had a year to teach and coach and develop his offensive guys, get his offense administered. He's got the run game in there. The players know the run game. On top of that, Iowa is looking a lot better across the offensive line, which I'm going to circle back to if you take into account Logan Jones and Jennings Dunker returning. And Jennings Dunker, it wasn't a slam dunk. I mean, he possibly, with a good combine and good testing numbers, could have possibly been drafted in this year's NFL draft. So, just to answer the question on the transfer portal directly, okay? To me, if you take into account the guys that Iowa were able to obtain that were already on the roster that could have gone elsewhere, and they did highlight that when discussing why they wanted to return to Iowa. Jennings Dunker literally cited that it's feasible that he would have received more money or been offered more money from other programs. If you take that into account, the guys that have returned, okay, it's not as crucial or it's not as much of a win in my eyes because they're guys that you already have, but it's still a win. And you take into account what Iowa tried to do in the transfer portal. At the high end, I would give Iowa a C+ at this point. Okay, I would still give them a passing grade. Now, if you just look at it purely from who Iowa was able to actually land in the transfer portal, I'd probably give them a D+, a D. Looking at the two guys that they landed, Hank Brown, specifically Jonah Pace, since I haven't been able to talk about him much yet, they're nice gets. And I do foresee both of them contributing to Iowa at some point. Jonah Pace, I think he's going to immediately come to Iowa and at the very least be a rotational piece. He is very flexible, which works in Iowa's scheme. Iowa, Phil Parker, Kelvin Bell, like guys that have defensive line versatility that can play inside or outside. Now, of course, 9 times out of 10, regardless of the flexibility, they do end up playing predominantly one position, either outside or inside. But there are some schemes where Iowa will rotate the defensive line and kind of mix and match, have them switch spots. I remember, I don't know what has happened to that scheme, but Iowa really did it a lot around 2015, 2016 when Nate Meyer was there. I don't know if you guys remember him. He was the small 6'2", D-end, undersized D-end. Where was he from? Maybe he was from Nebraska. I can't remember what state he was from. I think he played in a 8-man football. Pulled up here, he was actually from Tabor, Iowa, where they would have this Raider package, I think it was called, where they would have all the guys standing up and they'd be moving on the defensive line. They'd be, jumping, doing kind of stunts, and then they'd just go. Or they'd only send 2 and drop back 2. I wonder what happened to that package. The problem with that package is you can really only utilize it on 100% known pass downs. And if a team is disciplined and good at checking down and having a multiple options to whatever play, if you see that front, you can check into a run and possibly pick up more yards than you probably should have. So I would give it purely a D plus. Again, not taking into account who Iowa was able to obtain or retain rather from the University of Iowa, who was already on the roster, not taking into account their attempts. Again, Jonah Pace is going to be an immediate contributor. Time will tell if he'll be a starter. He does already have college experience, which will definitely work in his favor, and he's got excellent size. And who knows what he'll be able to do with the coaching that Iowa provides. Aaron Graves will definitely be one of the starters. I think this guy will likely be on the inside, but he can compete for Y.A. Black's spot with Brian Allen and some of the other defensive tackle prospects that Iowa has. So, it is what it is, guys. It's as I've said, until Iowa is able to have some success in the passing game, either through all Big Ten selections, through individual performance, through team performance and the team numbers, where you can put it on film and show it to recruits. Until that is the case, Iowa's main selling point is a hope and a prayer, banking on Tim Lester, saying, hey, come play for Tim Lester. He's a good offensive coordinator. He's going to get this Iowa offense on track. You're the missing piece that we need. You're the missing piece. Once you get here, all bets are off. We're going to be solid. You're the guy that we just need in order to propel us and have these statistical outputs. And a lot of guys, I'm sure are flattered by that and like that. And obviously Iowa is still being taken seriously, which is why they are getting visits, because these recruits know that the University of Iowa is a solid football program. They know this. But in the end, when they have time to critically evaluate and look at the Iowa offense, they ask themselves, is this really my best shot at having a successful season, putting up good numbers, and getting to the next level? And the answer is a resounding no. At least now it is a no. So, just to wrap this up, If you don't know, some of the guys that Iowa was able to retain, I thought Mason Richmond might be able to come back for one more year. I guess that's not the case. I think he could really benefit from an extra year of eligibility. Iowa on the offensive line is going to have Bo Stevens, aka Bo Steffens. They'll have Logan Jones. They'll have Jennings Dunker. So they'll have 3 starters returning. And of course, there's guys in the waiting wings who have received plenty of playing time, including out of the state of Nebraska, Cade Piper, which was a really under the radar recruit. Offensive line recruiting is really a crapshoot because you don't know how guys will grow. You don't know the tenacity, the grittiness, the meanness that they have internally. And that's why you do see guys like Cade Piper, who were these low recruited guys that come in and immediately are, seeing reps in the two deeps because they had some of the intangibles that are hard to look at for recruiting services. So you have Cade Piper, who will probably slide into Connor Colby's spot. He was the highest graded by Pro Football Focus offensive lineman overall for anybody who received, a minimum X amount of snaps. Behind that, I think, Trevor Locke is probably a favorite to take over the left tackle, but it'll come down to Michael Myslinski and Cade Piper probably for the other guard position. I'm just looking at my screen here. So Iowa retained Logan Jones. They retained Jennings Dunker. Those were 2 huge gets. And will definitely help Iowa to have another successful year in the run game with some of the young running backs that they have in the room. I don't want to say unproven, but not as established as a Caleb Johnson. Although Josiah Patterson has been around for a little while now, and obviously Kamari Moulton was Iowa's starter going into the year, and then became the backup. So I'm excited about his future. I think there's a reason why he was the starter going into the year, and I think Iowa fans just understand this. What does that say about him? That he was actually the starter coming into the season over Caleb Johnson, who had one of the best seasons in Hawkeye history. Okay, what does that tell you what he was able to do and how highly the coaches think of him? So I low-key, I'm very excited about him, and I think he can have, I would not be surprised, not trying to look too much forward to next year, but he can have a 1,000-yard season. And then Aaron Graves is coming back. Ethan Herkett is coming back. So Iowa's offensive and defensive line are in excellent shape going into next year. And that's pretty much it. Those were the big names. So we'll see what happens, guys. Just to wrap this up, there will be another window, once the bowl games settle and more guys are able to look around and see what guys were brought in and what guys decided to stay at whatever school they're at. There will be more names that put their hat in the transfer portal, and you never know what will happen. Just because a guy is committed doesn't mean he's going to end up playing for them 100%. I mean, anything is possible these days. So don't even be surprised if you see some similar names that you thought were committed elsewhere. Just look at Caden Proctor. I mean, Caden Proctor was literally going to be, he was on campus doing workouts, and then he ended up going back to Alabama. So anything is possible. For those who are not aware, the 2 transfer portal gets that Iowa have received have both been practicing with Iowa in bowl prep, and that's huge. And that's why, even though the bowl games are not what they used to be, it's invaluable reps that they receive. Okay, So anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, like, comment. You guys know the drill. And last but not least, DBAP, don't be a pussy willow. In fact, your feelings, because your feelings just don't matter. Like I said, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We are inching so close to 2,000 subscribers. And last but not least, go Hawks. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.